Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to the fourth edition of a Cultural Economics online series. It is our great pleasure to welcome Areti Chavale from the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow in the UK. Areti will speak about her current research, which is, by the way, under review. And the presentation is titled "The Artist Share, Artist Resale Right and the Art Market, Evidence from British Art Auctions." Areti Chavale is a lecturer in management at the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow, and she works on the intersection of art, business, and law. She got her PhD at the University of Glasgow on this very same topic. So, Areti, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Elisabetta, for allowing me to be part of these online seminars. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. I will share my slides with everyone, and I will give my presentation for around 30 minutes and then allow time for a discussion and for questions. However, if there's something that you wanted to add while I talk, I really don't mind any questions as I talk. So just raise your hands, and I'm happy to take questions at any point. So I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see it all right? No?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Let me just go to the presentation. All right. So my subject is artist resale right and its influence on the art market. And I use evidence from British art auctions and from experts in the art market. This was the subject of my PhD, as Elisabetta mentioned, and it's now a paper which is under review. So an overview of what I'll cover today in my presentation. I will talk about the background of artist resale right. For those of you who are not familiar, I will explain my research aims and objectives. I will discuss a little bit about the literature and the chosen methods. And finally, I will present my findings and the conclusions. Now, in terms of the background, so as you all know, the art market is characterized by many low-paid artists, with a few exceptions of global superstars. Recognition often comes late in artists' lives or after they pass away. And artist resale rights is a way for artists or their heirs to be compensated from secondary sales when that happens later on or after they pass away. A bit of background on artist resale right. It originated in France in the 19th century. It was harmonized in the EU with Directive 2001/84 EC, and it was implemented in the UK in 2006 for living artists, and in 2012 for artists' hires for a time frame of 70 years after their death. After Brexit, the United Kingdom decided to retain artist resale right, although it's not bound by the EU directive anymore. So the questions I aim to answer with my research are: how does artist resale right influence buyers' willingness to pay? How it influences auction prices? And ultimately, if it needs to be reconsidered post-Brexit in the UK. Now, looking at the theory, the literature, current literature on the subject, some of the earliest studies are by Price and Filler, and obviously Victor Ginsburg, who is well known in this field, who have predicted a negative effect on art production and prices because of artist resale right. A study by Carpenter from the 90s that which finds that there's an effect on buyers' willingness to pay because of artist resale right, that it reduces artwork prices. And Victor Ginsburg also found that there might be a move of, he didn't find that, he predicted that there might be a move of artworks from the UK and the EU to the US for sale, as artist resale right did not apply there. The empirical literature of the subject shows no strong evidence of artist resale right reducing UK prices, as you can see here with these different studies by Graddy, Horowitz, and Szymanski, or Barton-Grassa and Graddy. The report by Claire McAndrew, which we all know, which suggests a decline in EU and UK market share after the introduction of artist resale rights. So there is conflicting evidence between these empirical findings, and they use combinations of mostly quantitative methods. However, some of them use some qualitative as well, like my own work. The contribution that I aim to make is to show data with a long-term post-2012 artwork price analysis. So my time range is from 2003 to 2021. I focus on a group of artists called the Scottish Gallerists, and I use quantitative and qualitative methods, so mixed methods, and I also explore policy decisions post-Brexit. In terms of my methodology, as I mentioned, the qualitative approach combines interviews with art market experts from places like Sotheby's, Bonhams, the White Cube Gallery, the Fine Arts Society, and some anonymous dealers and consultants. I've also interviewed a group of people who are experts in artist resale rights, such as representatives from the collecting societies ACS, DAX, and representatives from the UK Intellectual Property Office. My aim through these interviews is to understand what their opinions are on artist resale rights and how it affects auction prices, how it affects buyers' willingness to pay, and their opinions on policy after Brexit. Considering the limitations, obviously this is a small sample size, 11 interviews, and it doesn't include collectors or artists, as it was very difficult to actually get participants from these two groups. The quantitative methodology I use aims to test whether artist resale right reduced prices for works by artists who are eligible for artist resale right. The data set that I used was collected by myself from artprice.com, and it uses auction prices by the Scottish gallerists for a period between 2003 and 2021, and my number of observations are 758 prices. Now you would ask why the Scottish gallerists as a group. First of all, I worked as a Scottish art specialist at Bonhams in Edinburgh. So my inspiration from this came from my experience at work. And I thought this was a wonderful group because they have many similarities. So the Scottish gallerists are 4 artists, and they were working in a very similar period, roughly around the 1930s, in Scotland and in France. They have similar artistic styles and subject matters. They are collected by similar collectors and selling in similar platforms. However, there is a big difference between them, that only one of them qualifies for artist resale right because of his time of death. So I employ a difference in difference method of analysis, where I perform a natural experiment using a treatment group, which includes artworks by J.D. Ferguson, who is eligible for artist resale right, and I compare them to works by a control group, which is artists, the other 3 gallerists, Peploe, Cadell, and Hunter, who are not eligible for artist resale right. So I'm trying to compare prices before and after 2012, which is when artist resale right was implemented in the UK for artists who passed away within the 70 years. Now, the limitations of this is that obviously it's a small sample size, especially the treatment group, which consists only of one artist. And the other limitation is that it's difficult to control for many other influences, such as the change in the economy, changing fashions of collecting, and other things like that. Now, moving on to the important part, which is my findings. Firstly, looking at artist resale right and influence on buyers' willingness to pay, and the key findings from the first set of interviews with art experts, I find three main things: an imbalance within the art market, especially, so in particular, an imbalance between auctions, galleries, and art dealers. I also find that artist resale right influences buyers' willingness to pay in a negative way. However, I do not find a relocation of sales from the UK to the US or elsewhere where artist resale right does not apply. To go in more detail and to look at some quotes. So firstly, beginning with the imbalance within the art market, from the interviews, it was obvious that there is two key distinctions. One is between types of buyers. So buyers are divided between trade and private. So trade buyers could be art dealers or galleries buying at auction or buying from other galleries or from other dealers. They usually buy to resell. They calculate all costs very carefully, and they're more affected by artist resale right. In contrast, private buyers, such as private collectors, usually buy for their own collection, so they might not intend to resell. They are generally more impulsive with their buying behavior, and they seem to be less affected by artist resale right. The other big distinction is between types of sellers. So those are between auctions and galleries or art dealers. Now, the big difference between those two is that auction houses always charge artist resale right to their buyers. Now, this is contrary to what the directive suggests, although it is not necessary that they follow the suggestion that the seller should pay artist resale right, whereas auctions charge it to the buyer. In contrast, galleries and art dealers often have artist resale right hidden, or if they don't have it hidden, they might end up absorbing it as part of a deal. At the same time, auction houses always charge artist resale right to buyers and never absorb it, never make any negotiation with their prices. And we see examples of this from quotes from the interviews. Here we see a representative from Sotheby's saying, artist resale right is charged to the buyer, we never absorb the cost. Whereas a representative from the Fine Arts Society here in Edinburgh says, we sometimes absorb it in order to make a deal happen. Another key finding is one that directly answers the research question, where the majority of interviewees reports that artist resale right influences buyers' willingness to pay, and especially trade buyers, such as galleries and art dealers. And some of the quotes you see here from Bonhams, they say, like say a dealer absolutely will affect them because they've worked out everything to the penny. So there's a big difference on how much artist resale right affects private collectors and trade buyers. Finally, in terms of relocation to the US or somewhere else, my key finding is that art specialists do not believe that there is such a thing happening, and that's mainly because transport and import costs far outweigh the cost of artist resale right, especially considering that ARR is capped at £12,500, so it could never be more than that. So a representative from White Cube says sometimes it's cheaper to just pay for the artist resale right than it is to ship it somewhere else. Moving on to the quantitative method, which looks into the influence of artist resale right on prices. As I mentioned, I use a diff-in-diff analysis. The period of study is between 2003 and 2021, which is 9 years before 2012 and 9 years after 2012, with a sample group as explained by the Scottish colorists, which you see their lovely paintings here. Now, this table looks at the descriptive difference in difference method of analysis, and I'll walk you through it. So the average price for works by the treatment group, so works by J.D. Ferguson, was 67,000 roughly before ARR was implemented in the UK. After it went down to 61,000 roughly. Works by the control group, so the rest of the colorists, was around 88,000. After it was around 114,000. So they were different before and they were different after, but the difference grew by 32,000 pounds, which could show the effect of artist resale right. And we see it here further, considering the regression over there, and we see that there's a standard error of 17,762, and the result is significantly important at the 10% level. To look at this more closely, I analyze it here a bit further. So the price gap before was 20,000, and that's all in euros. And after 2012, when artist resale right was applied, the price gap grew to 53,000. So artist resale right is associated with a 32,000 euro decline in auction prices by Ferguson. So roughly 9% decline, whereas the control group increased by 30%. What could this mean? So artist resale right appears to negatively influence prices for eligible works, or that buyers may reduce their willingness to pay due to the additional resale royalty. However, following feedback from an earlier presentation, I tried to look at how much artist resale right could actually be. So if the average price for one of Ferguson's work was around 67 and post-2012 was about 61, then the price decreased by around 6,000 euros. So if we take this into account and try and calculate how much the artist resale right would be on the average price, we see a discrepancy between the two. So if artist resale right on a work, an average price of 67,000 would be 2.5, and the price reduction would be 6.2, then that's a big difference. So to put it in plain words, would someone decrease their price by almost 6,500 euros just to avoid the 2,500 artist resale right cost? The reasons for this discrepancy could be that buyers anticipate future resale costs, or that trade buyers adjusted margins, or it could be that artist resale rights signaled an additional transaction cost. Now, in order to check the validity of my results, I performed some robustness checks. So I controlled for size. So I added an extra variable on my regression and used the measurements for each painting. And I found that there is an increase by approximately 30 euros per square meter. Now, adding size as a variable for all artists increased by 30%. So price and size increased together. However, it's important to see that the ARR effect remains statistically significant. I then controlled for different artists. So I used the other artists in the group. So I switched the treatment and control groups to see if there would be any significant result. However, the validity, if I test for different artists, I didn't find any significant effects. Lastly, I tested some placebo years. So I pretended that the year of artist resale right implementation was 2007 or 2017, but no significant effects were found in these years. And here is just one example of the robustness checks where I tested for 2007, so 4 years before and after 2007, and the result I find is not significantly, statistically significant. Now, finally, the interviews with the other group of artist resale right policy experts finds the following findings. So artist resale right acts as a form of social welfare for artists and their families. It helps middle or lower income artists. If there's an improvement in the administration and transparency of artist resale rights, that would hugely benefit artists and the art market. And the future vision that everyone in this group holds for artist resale right is a multilateral treaty, so an international treaty. So most policy experts support the retaining of artist resale right after Brexit. They suggest some reforms. And the most important thing is if we bring all the findings together, though the quantitative evidence and the first set of interviews find a decrease in prices or a negative effect on willingness to pay, however, policy experts argue that artist resale right is socially and ethically necessary for artists' welfare, so its benefits, far outweigh the disadvantages. Looking at these findings in more detail, so artist resale right can act as a form of social welfare, especially considering how low pensions for artists are. It supports their hires and their families after they pass away. It is important as artists often face irregular income or unstable employment. Also, evidence from DAX and ACS shows that a lot of artists who are modest earning benefit from artist resale rights in contrast to some people who claimed in the past that it was only successful artists who benefit. And we see here from these quotes, so from ACS, one artist we're paying ARR for is staying in a nursing home. So they're paying for their nursing home or old people's home. And Doug says that a lot of people benefit in the middle and some people get very little money from artist resale rights. But it's important because it tells them that the artists maybe that don't have representation or ones that did very well early in their career but no later on, that there is a market in their work. Now, in terms of improving administration and transparency, from the interviews, it became apparent that there need to be clearer rules on unclaimed royalties. So royalties that are paid, but the collecting societies don't know who the hires are, so they don't have anyone to pay those royalties to. Tracing artist hires, if they don't know them, is really important, and having clear rules on refund procedure for unclaimed royalties. So one quote here is from an art dealer who wishes to remain anonymous, who say, Tax and ACS have already been collecting it, ARR, for more than 7 years now. So after 7 years, they had X amount of funds, which was not allocated. So art dealers are concerned about non-allocated funds, which can lead to them not being happy paying for artist resale right, of course. And lastly, in terms of policy experts' vision for artist resale rights, a multilateral treaty, so a harmonized global system which would remove any distortions in the art market. And that was argued by most people, if not all, from that group of interviewees. So in conclusion, having reviewed all my findings, I would argue that artist resale right may reduce prices and buyers' willingness to pay for eligible artists. However, it offers substantial long-term benefits for artists and their hires, and it has been rightly retained in the UK. Its retention with reform is recommending, rather its abolition. And to close with a quote by a Senegalese sculptor, Ousmane Sow, artists do not live on thin air, and because they enrich the world with their art, they should be protected. Thank you so much, and I welcome any questions that you might have or any notes, any feedback for me. That would be very valuable, and I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Areti, for your very interesting presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have any news from Katy Graddy, who is supposed to be your discussant. So I will try to somehow replace her for the discussion of your presentation. So your presentation, that differently from usual presentations at CEOS, was not anticipated by a already printed available document, because as I mentioned at the beginning, your paper is currently under review, so fingers crossed. I have a question, because if we look at the market of the Scottish colorists, it is a quite florid market. Price records at auctions were established quite recently. I wonder, from an economic perspective, since you focused on the only Scottish colorist subject to the artist resale right, namely Ferguson, I wonder whether the implementation of the resale right caused a temporary shock on his prices and caused a sort of substitution effect to the benefit of the other three major Scottish colorists, or more in general, the Scottish colorists. So have you looked into that? What was the approach you took, if so?
So yes, from my experience, what could have happened there is that usually when a specialist set up prices, there's always a discussion of what could influence, the buyer's decision on how much to bid. So it could potentially be that two things are at play. So whoever is pricing the work, so the specialist or the art dealer or gallerist, thinks that because of artist resale right, people would be willing to pay less, so they reduce their estimates as well for Ferguson, whereas they're not doing it for the other three. And then also the buyer also reduces, the price that they're willing to pay. So these two might come together and drop prices. But it's interesting how you called it a shock, because it could be that if we, test for prices later on, so my prices are up to 2021. It's now 2026, so it would be interesting maybe to look at prices up to 2026 and see if there's a difference later on, if they come back to normal in a way. So that would be something I'll make a note to check. And I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. So from a quantitative perspective, you could simply compare the price trends across the different artists to see if any difference is in place. So thank you very much. Are there other questions or comments from the floor? I don't think so. So I have another
explained everything very clearly.
Yeah. So I have another question. So not only you applied a mixed method approach, drawing from different disciplines, but you can also, could you also exploit any practice experience on the art market in conducting this research?
I'm sorry, what do you mean practice? research?
I mean, because you dealt with art market practitioners, so during the interviews, to what extent this contributed to your analysis and to your findings?
Yeah, so it seems that art experts do not really base their opinions on data, right? They're just talking about from experience. So when you ask them, do you think there's a relocation of sales? They would just say what they think in terms of their experience rather than what we researchers would do would sit down, look at the data, and base our opinions on that. So it was quite interesting to see what people who actually are in the art market and making these decisions on a daily basis, what they would say, not basing their views on actual data. So there was, it was interesting to see that, but there were a lot of similarities between what they said, which kind of like reinforces my views. So most of them would say, yes, there is an influence on buyers' willingness to pay, but we don't know to what extent.
I see. Another point, the UK was the last European country, because of a sort of exception, adopting the artist resale right in Europe. That is, the UK implemented the law years after continental Europe. Do you think that this somehow benefited UK and in particular, in your particular case, Scottish artists, because the market somehow was already prepared, had already to some extent absorbed this change that is connected with that? Is the market for Scottish colorists an international market or not?
Okay, that's a very good question. So I'll start from the end. So the market for Scottish artists is not really international. I believe that most of the people who collect it would be Scottish, if not, British. There could be situations where Scottish art is sold in the US. I've seen this before, but that's probably for practical reasons. If a work is already there and it costs too much to send it back for a sale, it might be included in a sale in New York or elsewhere in the US. But I would say that the market is mostly in the UK, if not in Scotland. And this is why quite often they bring, big auction houses like Sotheby's would bring the Scottish sale to be viewed in Edinburgh if it was going to sell in London, and or Scottish sales would take place in Scotland. At the same time, in terms of the UK being one, I believe it was one of the 4 countries that were kind of last to adopt artist resale right. And I think that has to do partly with the perception of intellectual property by people in Britain. And they view it more like a property right. So I think they weren't as friendly towards it as, let's say, people from France would have been, who see it more as a moral right. So I think there was a lot of pushback from the art market not to adopt it, trying to see, if it would negatively affect the art market. And looking at my findings, I do think that its negative effect would be more impactful for the actual art market rather than artists themselves. So maybe not so good for the art market, but really good for artists. And so if it benefited the UK, that I do not know, to be honest. But if we think of it logically, if they had more time to prepare, even for the administrative part, so because other countries already had a system in place on how to administer artist resale right, the UK might have had more time to prepare for it in order to know how to administrate it in an efficient way, so that they don't lose money from that as well. So there's that too. Processing it is costly.
Thank you very much. So is there any question from Tal? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Areti. It's really very interesting. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this very interesting topic, which actually I wasn't familiar with. I guess that the resale tax is a percentage of the price of the artwork, and you said that it's capped at some level. So I just want to ask if you somehow took into account in your research that yielded the conclusion that there is a negative effect on resale, the different prices of the artwork themselves. Let's say, I mean, is it the effect is linear across every price level of the artwork? Because I guess there is some variation around this. So, can you say something about this?
Thank you, Tal. Very good question, actually. And yes, you are very right. It is not linear. There is a big difference, and that is mostly argued by the interviewees. So I didn't test it in a quantitative way, but in the interviews, it became apparent, one of the kind of smaller points, that it is not significant for the very low priced works. So if something sells for €1,000, artist resale right 4%, £40, that's not significant. It's also not significant in the really, really high prices. So if something sells for like £10 million, because there's a cap, artist resale right would only be £12,500. Again, if you're prepared to pay 10 million for a work, £12,000 is not going to affect your pricing. So from the interviews, what seemed to be the case is that in the middle ground, in a particular kind of group of prices, which I haven't established, very well yet, that's why I did not include it, there seems to be a greater effect somewhere in the middle. So very good observation.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I would need to test it, further research on that.
By the way, are you pursuing on this topic, artist resale right, in your current research?
So is this a question for me?
No. Yes.
So that would need to be something that's kind of added. I think it would probably be a different paper where you would need to try and investigate at what level, exactly. That would require a different set of data and a different kind of analysis to be able to find exactly at which level it has the most effect.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Are there other questions or comments? Okay, so if so, I would like to thank again Areti Chavale from the University of Edinburgh very much for presenting at the 40th CEOS. So if you would like to watch these and other recordings, please don't hesitate and visit our YouTube channel. If you wanna present here, please don't hesitate to contact me or to use the submission form. So CEOS will be on leave starting from next month during the summer, but we will get back at the end of the summer. In September, we are already finalizing the new calendar of CEOS for the next academic year. So thank you very much for being with us, and see you soon after this summer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elisabetta.
Thank you. Bye-bye.